Thanks
right?
again. Look at this crowd. This is the last part of the day, and they came for you, and obviously for
It
good
could
reason.
certainly be somewhere else, couldn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
At a party coming up soon.
Good.
But I want to ask you, I know you spent a lot of time working on this concept of psychological safety. You're the one who coined this term, yes?
More or less.
Yes,
Yeah.
more or less. So it's interesting to me because I buy in. I think it's the smart thing to do, the right thing to do, the effective, efficient thing to do. And now I'm wondering, for all the people in our audience, what micro steps can they take if they are not the manager that is necessarily deferential or allow themselves to be vulnerable for their teams? And for the individual, because everyone has to buy in, if they're not the type that no matter what the directive is, somebody invites them, please, I want to hear from you. They're introverted. They're from a marginalized group that doesn't feel like they can speak up for whatever reason. What are some of the micro steps people can take so managers can create the environment of psychological safety and individuals can contribute to the environment of psychological safety?
It's a great question. And as you say it, I hadn't really ever articulated this before, but I'm not sure everyone has to buy in.
Okay.
Enough people have to buy in that it just becomes a different way of working around here. Right? There's enough candor that it just, the guards start to go down.
Okay.
But the more important answer is, I think the number one thing, micro, you said, the number one thing is ask good questions.
Okay.
And the beauty of that recommendation is that anyone can do it. Right? Anyone can do it. The team leader can do it, the boss can do it, a team member can do it, and it's almost always appreciated. And again, I'm going to define a good question as one that is focusing on us on the issue that matters, that is phrased in a way that requests thought, and it gives people room to respond. Okay. So anytime any individual asks a colleague or even a manager a good question, they're showing respect. I'm interested in what you have to say.
No, I absolutely, because I'm thinking to myself, it's one thing to say, oh, there's a problem and I have to tell you about it. But it's another to have a little bit of deference to the leader or to the associate and say, I have this question. And everyone knows when you ask that question, you're challenging in some way. But if you ask it, you're paying respect. And I can see, even in that you just asked me, I'm curious to see what you think. You were doing right then, you were asking my opinion, and it was inviting me to discuss my opinion, which already makes me feel more comfortable with you.
Yeah, and welcome. Right?
Yes.
So I'm inviting you.
Right.
I mean, the great thing, so even the beauty of it is that even the introvert, who, as you say, or the person who believes themselves to be in a marginalized group, if asked a direct question, it feels mighty awkward not to answer.
Right.
And so we answer, and then of course you've got to listen, and be appreciative of what you're learning.
Now, did you learn over the last 19 months or so, like that Zoom allowed for people, or can you take some of those lessons? I know everyone's like, oh, Zoom. Can you take lessons from that? I mean, are there ways that leaders can invite opinions anonymously or in some other way to encourage discussion?
Absolutely. So that, Zoom, it's a blessing and a curse. It's a double-edged sword. It can inhibit voice for all the reasons that all of us now know all too well. It can be harder to sort of jump in or to lean in and then have someone realize that you have something to say, right? All of that is gone. We've lost that in Zoom. But we also have the tools, the polls, the chat, all right, let's just go around the screen and get your thoughts on this, right? So what it means is to make this work in Zoom, you have to have an even heavier hand in terms of sort of creating the space and the opportunity for voice.
Right, absolutely. And we all want to be back around the water cooler anyway. So it's a nicer environment when we're in person. Thank goodness, right? We're all here. So I also was listening to everything you had to say and felt very educated, and I'm sure everyone here is enlightened as well. And in a perfect world, they're going to all leave here. They're going to take all these concepts back to their organizations. They're going to read your book. They're going to really follow through. No. So that, yes, we hope that happens. And there are all these people impacted. But to be honest about it, for it to be fully fleshed out and implemented in an organization, there's work to be done. People are going to have to implement processes. This is going to have to be a directive. It's going to cost people time and money. And this group of people, all these people in their capacity, they respond to the bottom line. They need to justify the cost of an effort. And I would love for you to talk about research or companies that have put numbers around this. How effective, how much more productive are people? What kind of loss has been avoided, and can we measure that?
That's, yeah, oh, so much, and I
I
don't
know,
want
I'm
to,
sorry,
I
I
don't
gave
want
you
to
a
take
lot.
too much time with this, but I will say there are studies, thankfully, there are studies most studies, by the way, happen at the team level inside organizations, but there are a handful of studies at the organizational level, and we have been able to show with higher psychological safety, a greater return on investment, better financial performance. But the tricky part here is that in a psychologically safe environment, you are one of the best performance advantages is the crises that don't happen,
Right.
the failures that don't happen.
can't measure that.
And you can't measure it. You
right.
can't say, "Wow, we avoided a major scandal this year,"
right.
and tell your shareholders to applaud, right? It's
that's
like,
right.
huh? Right? So there's a certain amount that we have to take on face validity. We live in a VUCA world. You do knowledge-intensive work. Problems don't age well. You want and need to hear about them quickly. That the price tag on not hearing about them can be anywhere between small and enormous.
Right.
But yes, there is research. There's certainly plenty of research at the team level showing better performance. And so what we often, you said investment of time and resources. What we often underplay is how much time and how many resources are invested in not speaking up, right? In not making the decisions we need to make and sort of kicking the can down the road. And then that just looks like normal business as usual, and we don't know that we could be performing at just a much higher level.
Right. So, but you've done all the research, and you have seen that it's really like in the operating room, right, with the non-invasive surgery. So we should just take a lesson from that.
Right. Take a lesson from that.
Right.
Take a lesson from Google. I didn't mention the famous study at Google a few years ago, but they studied 180 teams over 3 years, tested 250 different variables. Psychological safety emerged as the #1 predictor of team performance. So,
Well, if Google says so.
Google says so, right?
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, thank you for that. All right, we're going to take some questions from the audience. Thank you all for submitting them, and the virtual audience as well. So, Amy, how can a subordinate, as opposed to a manager, foster psychological safety in their workplace? We talked a little bit about that.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about it, but I'm going to give you 3 words: humility, curiosity, and empathy. And humility is recognizing out loud, wow, we've never done this before. Or wow, this client is very demanding. Whatever it is, you say it out loud and you sort of break the ice and you make it clear that we need you. Like we need ideas, we need your voice. So you can just be the person who's sort of naming what everybody already knows. That helps. Curiosity, again, asking good questions, showing the respect that you have for your colleagues by being the person who's like, well, wait a minute, what about this? Have we thought, what are you seeing out there? And so you're inviting voices in. And then finally, the empathy to have a productive response, that choose your response, when you hear bad news or when someone says something you don't agree with.
Right. Well, I'm wondering also, like, how do you feel, and I don't know the answer to this question, how do you feel about somebody, like if they were having some water cooler talk and you're in a meeting and they say, oh, Amy, you had a good idea about that. What do you think? Like calling people, inviting them, even if somebody else asked the question, inviting one of your colleagues.
But it's a good, it's a warm call, right?
Right.
Because I know you have an idea. I'm not putting you in a position where I might embarrass you.
Right.
I know you have an idea. I believe it to be good.
Yes.
And I'd like to, I'm gonna invite you in because you're a little quiet.
Yeah, okay, great, I love that. All right, so another question is, what are your recommendations for navigating a yes, sir organization? Good question.
Name it, right? I mean, I believe you have to, a little bit of courage here, but name it, right? Name it, name what you see here. I see an organization that is at risk. Right? We're in this enormously uncertain context, and the yes, sir environment that I see creates risks. Now, I know that takes a lot of courage to say, but I think it's rather rational to say it. And please understand that more often than not, when you're in a yes, sir environment, they are not intentionally creating it. Right? It's habitual. It's been just around this way for a while, and people are just kind of doing it, as in that cartoon, as a matter of habit. They don't know what they're missing. Right? They are not deliberately silencing voices more often than not. They're just unaware.
So I have a personal example.
Yeah,
One of my best friends says that her CEO says, I don't like it when people have too much time on their hands. I want everybody to be a little overworked. Has said this out loud.
Yeah,
I want
yeah.
everybody to be a little overworked, and then I know that everyone's going to be as productive as they can and efficient as they can and not waste time. And so maybe not everyone is
Right.
well-intentioned.
Well, that may be true.
Yeah.
Well, that person may just have a faulty, in fact, I would call it an outmoded mental model.
Right.
And there are some contexts where that might be true, right? Where there's an optimal amount of, like slight overload, but that better be a context where the formula for achieving results is very clear-cut. Because in any context where either innovation or judgment or ingenuity are needed, you need a little bit of slack.
Yeah, right.
You just do.
Right. We
So-
talked about that with Sunil Gupta earlier. You need time to reflect.
You need a little bit of slack.
Yeah.
Just a time to reflect, time to brainstorm. Innovation's not efficient.
Right, no.
There's about a million things that don't work, and then there's the one that does.
Exactly,
Right?
you
That's
have to-
not an efficiency game, but it is an investment game. Right? We invest that time solving that problem, coming up with that new idea, because it's going to pay off later.
Right, absolutely. Okay, we have another question. In a virtual environment, how do you team well? For example, collaborate on the fly, given that we are not all in the office.
This is a really important question. And I just saw a study in Nature Human Behavior, which is one of the Nature journals. It was done at Microsoft, actually. And it discovered that, and this won't surprise you, I'm quite sure, that throughout the pandemic, what we have seen was the collaboration has gotten narrower. We're still collaborating, of course, but we're far more likely to be collaborating with people in our silos and less likely to be reaching out across silos. So Don Sol's data would be even worse today.
Right.
And similarly, we're more likely to collaborate with people we already know, again, no surprise, and far less likely to be kind of bringing in new collaborators, new relationships, new partners. So you're identifying something that's a very real risk, a very real problem. And I think when you've identified something, it's your job then to name it, and then, since problem solving is a team sport, invite other people in.
Right. I know,
help
because even
solve
socially,
it.
people have said, oh, during COVID, my social circles got smaller.
Got
It just happened
yeah.
everywhere.
Just happened, of course.
Right, so now
No
that we all
happy
know it.
collisions, no,
Right.
accidental meeting
Right.
someone new in the lunch line and
Right.
kind of getting to know each other. So we're going to have to overcompensate
Right.
for that.
Right.
With
like you
deliberate.
said,
Yeah.
the first
Name
step
it.
in solving a problem is naming it and then
And
moving
then
forward.
realize it's a team sport to solve it.
Right, absolutely. Okay, Amy, do you have a strategy to identify too many cooks in the kitchen that can negatively impact team goals?
That sounds like something my husband would say, because he is the cook and in the kitchen. But my answer is teaming. I've talked a lot about the creating the environment where teaming can happen, but I didn't talk as much about the discipline for doing it well. This can be a very thoughtful, scientific, maybe that's not the right word, but process. So if you have too many cooks, I think by that you mean there are people here who aren't really adding value, or comments that aren't adding value, or it's just too chaotic. So again, name it, and let's figure out, who do we really need and want on this? No one will ever be terribly unhappy to be freed from a project, right? We're all on
Excluded
way
from a
too many
meeting.
projects.
Yeah.
The number, people who have been tracking this, the number of teams that people are on at work has gone way too high. So we need to rationalize it. We need to have a couple of key priorities, maybe 3, much beyond that, and I have way too many, so I'm guilty, but much beyond that, we're just less effective to our teams, to our goals, to our clients.
Okay, so if you have just the right amount of representation from the different
And
groups that might
it won't be
affect.
clear in advance exactly what
Right.
that is, right? This has to be decided in a kind of iterative way through conversation.
Right. And Adam Grant says, think like a scientist. Your husband's a scientist. Go ahead, evaluate your hypothesis, but if this isn't working,
Right,
then
let's try it. Let's try it.
reevaluate.
In fact, when I was studying Disney, back during the making of Frozen, I was studying the systems animation group, and they kept experimenting with different size teams, different configuration, and said, look, we're trying to figure out what works.
Right.
And they made it like a meta project, right? They made it an aspect of the work. And they totally broke down the silos and did much better work as a result.
Oh, I think that's a really important part. You make it a part of the work.
Yes,
Absolutely.
yes. So there's the work, and then there's the work of how do we do the work.
Yeah. Oh, I love that, Amy. All right, so another question is, how do you say no to a boss multiple times and not be deemed difficult? We're going to write a book on
Yeah,
this one,
I mean,
right?
you probably can't, but that's not true. You have to be doing more than no, right? You have to be saying, here's how I see it. What am I missing, right? So remember that table I had where you're sort of shifting from, I know I'm right, and this guy's being difficult, and I need him to agree with me, to, I'm pretty sure I have a valid point of view or a valid concern or this isn't going to work, and I may be missing something. So I'm responsible for explaining what I see.
Right.
And then I'm also responsible for learning how he sees it.
Right, and if you ask him the
Right.
question, right? If you ask
Right.
him or her,
Right, him or her.
the question.
It's so funny when it's terrible, right? Because when I see the word boss, because in a way sorry, I shouldn't say this, a pejorative word, right?
Yeah,
It's
right.
not my
Yeah.
leader, my team leader,
Right,
my
right, right,
manager,
right.
or anyway, but forget that, scratch that from the record. So, but it's the way you say no matters. Are you saying it from a place of knowing or a place of helping
Right.
and curiosity and openness to possibly being wrong in your no?
Right, right. So if you ask a question, then it's
Yeah.
paying a little deference,
Yeah.
allowing some feedback that you didn't
Yeah.
consider, and maybe then you won't be so difficult
But
because
not
you're not
just
just
a
saying
question,
no. You're,
right?
yeah,
I mean, I think you say, here's what I see.
right. Yeah.
Do you see it too? Am I missing something? How's this going to work?
Right. All right, great. Great question. I love that it added a little humor to the afternoon as well. All right, what recommendations do you have when the boss fails to follow the recommendations presented?
Well, there's a menu of options here. One is buckle down, do your work. Hope if it doesn't get too much in your way, right? If you can. By the way, sometimes it almost doesn't matter what the boss is doing. You and your team are just creating a wonderful thing together, and go do it. So I don't know enough about the situation. Other times, you might be really in a tough spot and you might need help. So go to the ombuds people, go get help, get a coach, get HR, get some, because sometimes you really are in a tough spot and you need to do something. And this last question.
Yeah, we have a last
Sorry.
question, and that is, how do you know when to leave a
'Cause
team?
it's
right.
so related. I want to just go right
absolutely.
into this one, which
please
is,
do.
that might be how you know when to leave. You've tried, you've been curious, you've been humble about what you see, you're very dedicated to making a difference in the work you do, and you find it's just not working. You owe it to yourself to leave that team.
Well, I gotta say, this is just a spectacular way to end our main stage for today. Thank you so much, Amy Edmondson, everyone.
Thank
It was a pleasure to meet
Thank you.
You're wonderful.
Love working with you.